So the one
Yeah.
thing that we found to be really beneficial is really just taking a look into where that ad spend is going. One way that we look at it is on a per product level and just making sure that those things are matching up, like you said, with the organic market share. That a lot of ways is determined on a per listing level. It's good ad spend allocation, really, at the end of the day.
All right, folks, welcome back to the High Voltage Business Builders podcast. We're going to talk about everything Amazon today. So if you have any interest in that space, growing, building, scaling, learning about the world of Amazon, we're going to talk about that today. We've got a guest on today that I'm going to bring in here in just a second. We're also going to talk about what it means to be in a big family. As you guys know, I have a relatively large family in the scale of families, but my guest has one that's even larger than me, which is cool because I don't always get to talk to somebody like that. And then what about the long-term goals and thinking of long-term opportunities and strategies of this business model? Again, I think from the beginning to where you're at, maybe in the working process or what your opportunities, look like for growing and scaling and maybe exiting the business. Maybe we'll cover all those topics today. What do you think, Elizabeth?
Awesome. Sounds good. I'm excited.
All right. Well, listen, let's get into the details real quick, and then we can dig into your background and past. Let's just get into Amazon today. What's the status of things? What's the state of the union from Elizabeth's perspective?
State of the union is Amazon is still growing, even how many years later. So that's fantastic.
Yeah.
But with growth comes a broader recognition of the opportunity that it affords, which means competition is fierce. So from a consumer standpoint, it's obviously great. We're getting more options, more competitiveness as far as like people are willing to go down in price. It's always good for the consumer. But sellers, it's getting more competitive, which just means the bottom line is getting squeezed, unfortunately.
Yeah. And that really depends upon, of course, where and what type of products you're selling.
Yeah.
And where do you typically see people selling in your world? What price range, retail, and kind of where you feel the squeeze happen?
It really, honestly, it runs the gamut. I will say lower priced items are traditionally more difficult, but I think that really is in any e-com channel. Like even if you had a 50% margin on a $5 product, the actual dollar value that you have to play with those margins being what they are and the price point being what they are is more difficult. So it tends to be like general conventional. If you ask anyone like, oh, I'm going to launch a product on Amazon, what price point should I choose? A lot of people say like $25 and above. That's definitely true. Although I would say the upper echelons, we definitely also work with some sellers that have more of a premium product. Those can be all right, but it really also is dependent. We didn't manage the ads for them, but I'm just generally trying to be helpful. So there's some people who would reach out to me. They were selling like real gold jewelry and they were asking like, oh, how do I navigate this and that? So I just gave them some pointers and then checked up with them a little later on. And they're like, yeah, they did good sales through e-com, but it's just really hard because again, there is a line, like I think you and me, like if we're going to drop hundreds of dollars on a product like that, there's a little bit of a distrust. Like, is it actually genuine gold? Even though the consumer, like Amazon has done a really good job of creating trust in their platform, which is why I think they're seeing that growth and why I don't really see it slowing unless they do something really scary. But they really have stuck to their mission from day one, create a good consumer experience, and then, making sure they're serving up the things that shoppers are looking for. So it's just kind of understanding honestly, just the kind of the types of transactions that happen in retail and then trying to get ahead of, those kind of consumer questions.
Yeah, no, that's good insights. And I know that Prime Day just occurred and we haven't got all the stats back from it because it's too soon, but I know the one in July, the average order value was like $59, which is one of the highest it's been on deck so far. We typically sell $50 to $200 in retail price point where we're at. So we typically see the higher end of the retail side. I don't prefer to play in the Amazon's mosh pit of sub $25 products where everybody's beating each other up.
Cutthroat. It's cutthroat.
Cutthroat, slaughterhouse. Oh, my ACost. And I was like, well, I don't care. My ACost is what it is to acquire to the consumer. So I think about it in a different way. What's your take on that? How do you go aggressive or moderately aggressive, I guess, in the market?
Yeah, I would agree with you there. I think the brands that we find, historically you could focus on ACost. That was a very good benchmark to go against. But as things have gotten more competitive, it's just really hard to maintain those low numbers. And so what ends up happening is a lot of times you shoot yourself in the foot if that's the only number that you would benchmark yourself against. So I'm 100% with you on that. The one really interesting thing of the Amazon platform is that advertising does have a direct correlation with ranking. Because of that, You can look at a broader picture of, like you said, that lifetime value of the customer or
Yeah.
like growth of the product. Maybe not even through like one specific lifetime value, but like your growth of like organic market share. What we find is that brands who are like stuck in the ACOS days, they're realizing that that's like actually hurting that organic market share.
It
So
really is. It
you see
really
the
is.
downward spiral. It's not pretty. So when you can take a more holistic view, a good benchmark that a lot of brands or, advertisers, whoever will use these days, classic total A costs, right? So you're looking at your ad budget in relation to your entire like growth trajectory and sales. I think that's a better way to look at it. I don't go so far as some where they're like, A cost is totally irrelevant.
Yeah.
It's not.
Yeah.
Like, I think it
Right.
should be a factor, but I'm with you on like continuously focusing in on that will probably end up hurting yourself in the long run.
Yeah, no, that's extremely smart. And I would agree that the thing about those numbers, I think, is that there's still quite a few people who haven't realized that the first
Mhm.
customer acquisition is kind of what we're talking about in terms of
Yeah.
this. And many still treat this like it has to be first customer acquisition, first product, and are
Yeah.
not thinking about second or third product post customer acquisition. So they're
Mhm.
actually not thinking about a brand strategy. They're still thinking
Yeah.
about products. So they aren't really focused on, well, if I acquire that customer, now, and this still costs me maybe more than an initial product. And of course, I want to get that at least break even or above. What I need to be thinking about is how do I round that brand? How do I create additional value? How do I add additional product to the marketplace that, meets this avatar? What would you say about all
I would 100% agree with that. I think brands grow through like additional product launches. I think any brand that's like has been stagnant for a couple of years and they're kind of continuously trying to like pull off of, kind of quote what we've always done and it's always been like this and you're not like looking to the future and planning sort of that long term because heaven forbid what happens if all of a sudden that market gets undercut or something else happens and you're kind of just continuously trying to pull from that and just thinking that things will always continue the way that they are. You need to have at least, have a foot in reality, know what's happening right now, but you definitely need to have at least some vision of what the future is going to look like if
Yeah.
you want to survive.
Yeah. And that's quite an interesting time we're living in right now, isn't it? At the time we're recording this, it's pre whatever we want to call that in November that's happening. What do you feel about How do you feel about that? What do your clients feel about that? How are you navigating that? Or, pros and cons, things you're worried about, things you're, excited about?
I obviously, keep my ear to the ground and then personally, like there's a lot of things that's going to affect other than just like business and, everything else. So I think it's definitely something to look towards and be aware of, just like what is that going to do to the economic climate, consumers, their sentiments, is there more free cash flow for them to spend? There's all of those factors and time will tell either way which goes. And then, we always have like what we think is going to happen. And then there's what actually is going to happen. So I've learned that although it makes sense to keep a vision of the future, you don't want to get blindsided by something happening
Right.
and you sort of like extrapolate out the things. And this is something that I've learned in my future is that, or just like my personal life. One thing that I've learned is I always like to prepare for the future, but plans are never, ever 100% what you think they're going to be. And
No, they're not.
prepare yourself, but I would say not like don't plan for the future, but define plans around I don't know, perceived outcome. A lot of times you end up just kind of wasting a lot of headspace and worrying yourself. So
You overthink it till you're
yeah.
worried and sick. One of the things specifically I'm thinking about, and maybe we can double click on this for a second, is the supply chain we have to deal with as private labelers and where we're moving product from and the cost of that product and the logistics and the time it takes to move that product as we've come through some very interesting times here in the last 5 years where we've never seen delays in product movement ever like that in my lifetime. So it's quite interesting to see that occur. But the next one is where's product coming from and how much is it going to cost? There's at least one candidate who's letting us know off the deck that if he's involved in this, products from certain locations in this world are going to take a hit big time. Are you advising clients or thinking about any of that in terms of the forward progression? Anybody who's heavily leveraged into, let's say, China or whatever? Are we discussing any of that?
Yeah, that's a good question. With what we focus in on, like our area of service to clients is on
Uh-huh.
the advertising side, which that's something we discussed before hopping on here. Like advertising touches everything, right? If you can't get product in, you can't advertise it. If the product costs go up, that goes into profitability, which should influence ad strategy. So we find that like all those things, even though it's not something we would technically handle in-house, it is something that like affects our work. So we definitely try and, as best we can make sure that our clients are prepped for it. We do
Yeah.
have quite a few clients, quite a few. We do have some that are like US based or sourcing from other ones. And so we just trust that we work with really good brands who, again, those are the brands we like to work with, are the ones that are like forward thinking. They have a more future vision about them. They're grounded in the real numbers, but they, like I said, they're not like, oh, this is what it's always been. They know how to roll and shift with the punches.
Yeah. It's going to have to be something that we really consider, especially the way we've heard certain language and stuff coming from Mexico,
Yep.
imports, and China, being basically told if they try to build too much in Mexico, they're going to get tariffed. And so China stopped their manufacturing for automotives in this last week just because of that. So there's some major global impacts of opportunities and challenges, and we just have to shift and move through those. On the area of advertising, which obviously impacts the growth of those businesses because they're going to maybe ask you to pull back on advertising if their supply chain isn't moving enough product.
Yeah.
Which, kind of for us on the advertising side and the direct response, we're like, damn, that's frustrating. Like we were really wanting to run with this and now we're having to slow down because of product, right? This is an experience. Where, in terms of the most valuable metrics you see on the advertising side, somebody listening to this who might be selling or thinking about it, where do you pinpoint the most valuable metrics in your advertising? What are those numbers and what are the metrics?
Yeah, I think that the metrics that we definitely use are, I mentioned them before. Total A cost, I think, is a really good one because that plays into profitability as well. Some things that we've been working on, or I personally worked on because it's like pet interest of mine and it thankfully feeds into my work. Yeah, is looking at sort of like projections. So that's a question we get quite often is, okay, so on the total A cost benchmark, like where should I be? And historically, there's been kind of like, well, on average, we see, growth focused brands doing about, like this number. Like it used to be, oh, if your total A cost number was above, probably roughly the 8% mark, like 8 to 10, maybe was a private label. Now, if you have a nationally recognized brand, like we work with some enterprise clients, like they're all day long, you can get like a 3 and 4% because they're benchmarking off of like their branded traffic and they have like that recognition.
Right.
If you're selling like private label products, you're mainly focused on Amazon. You don't really have as much brand recognition. Historically, it was like that 8 and 10%. And what we found is that those brands, again, it's due to market competition, but also, unfortunately, it also has to do with the fact that Amazon has just almost flooded their detail pages with more ad spots, which of course is great in terms of me because, where Amazon's going and their focus is where our business is. So as much as I hate to say that, it's true. But so there's just less organic placement these days, which means you have to get more savvy with what you're doing in advertising. Cost per click's going off, cost per click. So there's a huge effect of total A cost. And so we have seen those numbers shift more towards like the 12% these days or, 15. If the brand can support it and they're really growth focused, they might be up to a 20, which again, 3 or 4 years ago, I would have looked at a 20% and be like, oh my gosh, you're going out of business. Like
you're going to fail at this whole thing. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Given the current climate, there's that. So one of the things going back to like the kind of pet projects I've been working on and we're slowly filtering that out into the team and giving them resources is when a client comes and says like, okay, where should I be? Again, historically we'd be like, okay, so these are like the averages, maybe fall between somewhere in there. And that I think is a good thing to do. But the other thing that you want to look at is where are my margins for the product? And, given, so you can actually look at the product's margins, price point, conversion rate, and actually benchmark if you want to end up with like, say, after ads and everything, I want like a 20% margin on my product or 15 or wherever you fall. You can actually reverse engineer that into what does my tacos number have to look like. So that's what we've been focused on. And then you can even go farther than that and say, okay, if that's my tacos number, given my conversion rates, this is actually what my average cost per click needs to be to achieve that. So we're working on stuff like that to kind of just give our brands more perspective on not just this is what the market averages are, but given your goals, where you want to go. And then, of course, it's up to us to like kind of figure out a creative ad strategy that's going to help them get there, which sometimes is easier said than done. But that's really what we found is looking at that to be super helpful.
Do you target any CLTV types of numbers in your brand advertising? And if so, maybe talk a little bit about what that looks like and what you see it as.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. The thing is, especially if you're talking about like lifetime values and subscribe and save things, that will actually play into your total A cost numbers because those subscribe and save purchases will show up in business reports. So in some ways, total A costs, if you're looking at it from an account level, will factor that in, which is quite useful. And so
Yeah.
you should see that number shift down over time as subscribe and saves go up. Other things like cross promotion purchases, there's some really interesting analysis that you can do there. Some of it can be done through ad data. One actually really interesting thing though, I'll throw this tidbit in here for anyone who is maybe doing brand licensing. Be very careful about your sponsored brand ad. Not a lot of people know this, but with sponsored brands, they have like this quote halo effect, which can work in benefit to you if you are the only one selling underneath that brand. But if you're not, for example, we have some brands that like will license like Nickelodeon and Disney products. You can imagine the large array of brand, products being sold underneath those brands. If you have a purchase through your sponsored brand, within that 14-day window, if somebody clicks on your advertising and then goes on to purchase underneath that brand, wherever the product may be, regardless if it's actually your product or not, Amazon will actually attribute that order to you within Ad Console. So something to be aware of. There's a way that you can actually track this, some reports you can pull to like analyze how much of this is happening in your account. But that's definitely something. So there is like, depending on how you're looking at it, there is some lifetime, like not like untrue allocations, but just something to double check for sure.
No, that's great. Great insights, especially with where those dollars come from and that return on advertising spend. Be very smart about it because we need every dollar to go towards our, opportunity and to dial that in. As you mentioned and alluded to, by 2026, Amazon is going to become a direct response marketing profitable engine higher than AWS. So everything they're moving is becoming an advertising engine. I've told my clients about this and I'll be saying it for the next year and a half. You are a direct response marketer who owns a brand. So we need to start acting like one. And what does it mean to be a direct response marketer on Amazon? You can no longer just be, I threw a product on Amazon and maybe I have the best product and I'll get a little lucky in some of this process. It really is, you need to be thinking about how you speak and direct and respond and understand the marketing side of this business, or you're going to get outmaneuvered by those who figured it out ahead of you. So you got about another year or so, a year and a quarter to get this figured out, because they're becoming a monster direct response marketing advertising engine. They're going on head to head with Google that just happened to sell products, which used to be the other way around. They were a product engine that was trying to become an advertising engine. And this has changed dramatically, which is why it's very important to have this conversation. And clearly you understand it. You've been in the weeds and the details. How long have you been in this? And
it's been 6 or 7 years now. So it definitely come from the evolution. When we got started, I remember the conversations were, should I run advertising? Where now the conversations are definitely, how do I run advertising? So that whole gamut, saw the ramp up, saw like, we thought those days, like, what is it? Amazon split out the targeting types and the autos and everybody's like, oh my gosh, this is so new. And now it's like, how many updates since then? It's
major updates. Yeah. That's quite a good amount of time to see the differences in the changes. I've been in it for 12 years and there's been a lot of things. And I remember when they hired the Google engineers and revamped the entire system of advertising and platform and went to the target-based stuff back in 2015. And that was quite a different change in the way that we saw the responsiveness. And again, I think you touched on this earlier and I'm going to bring it back just so people can hear this, but there's the benefit of paid traffic and organic. If you don't understand what tacos is, total advertising cost of sales, you really need to understand that this is only one of two engines online where you can pay for advertising that returns an organic result, which is extremely powerful when done correctly. And that's one of the things I loved as a media buyer when I got involved in the platform first, was because I was doing media buying in the online space before they even had push button Facebook marketing stuff. Everybody thinks it's so hard now. And I'm like, dude, we were uploading stuff in spreadsheets. But now it's gotten to such a degree of technical complication. In some ways, people stop thinking about the strategy and get too far into the tactics. But you just have to remember that high level thing. When I'm spending money on advertising, I can make money on organic. And that's where your total advertising cost of sales really dials in. And as mentioned earlier, you said I'm going to say 8 to 15% roughly. If your tacos, depending upon retail price point, can fit into those, and your profitability, most importantly, can fit into that. So for us, we've got to see products above $12 in net profit, typically 24, 36, 48, if we're going to be within the 8 to 15% range. And that gives us buying and competition in the marketplace. And it's something clearly I think you have articulated well today, which is great. But how do you personally balance all this? So you've been in this for 6 to 7 years. Are you a mom? Do you have kids? Do you stay at home? Do you do this from your own life? What does it look like?
Yeah. So the way that I balance it is just letting everything flow together. So my life is very intertwined. That's by intention. Some people like to have it very split off, but I don't. Okay. And yes, I have 6 children. When we were really getting started in this business, it was right after got hit with a 2-for-1 on the end of that. So I have twins.
Mm.
So I had like twins. I was reminiscing with another friend in my industry, and they were talking about like, oh yeah, balancing kids and having young kids, and you trying to go like putting them in the other room, hoping they don't cry as you take a sales call. There was definitely a lot of things that were quite hectic, especially with the two. That was a thing.
Yeah.
But no, it's been fabulous. And as my kids grow, so when I say like life is very intertwined, the whole reason we really started up back in the day, getting into the Amazon game through like, selling ourselves on a much smaller level.
Yeah.
I don't have a really big sexy axe that I can brag of, but it definitely got us into the world and then shifted into advertising when I just found a personal interest there and found out I was pretty dang good at it.
Mm-hmm.
And then just kind of grew from there. But the whole reason, like the origin story started because we wanted a way for the whole family unit to like stay together very much. Not that there's anything wrong with having an external career. It's just what kind of life do you want to build? And so I was at home with the kids. So I kind of spearheaded a lot of that because I had snippets of time, but I had much more time versus, my husband being out, having to work, traditional job, he would come home. But that sort of allowed us to say that we homeschool our kids. Everything's kind of intertwined. I have a home office, so the kids can come in. I can go say hi to them between calls. And that's been really great, which I think has allowed me to kind of work the long hours that I do, put in the effort that is needed because I have two benefits. One is just the ability to be flexible, which means, again, I can go see them. They can come in here or I can shut them out like we're doing right now where everything's locked. I'm like, don't bother mommy, we're on a recording. But then also I just have a lot of support of they understand, oh, mommy is on a call or this or that. So although, there's a lot of flexibility, I also have a good support system and where I'm not, again, how do you want to build your life? Who do you want to build it with? Are you on the same page? So for us, we're very much on the same page. And I don't get a lot of pushback. Like if I want to work till 10 o'clock at night because I had some really cool idea and I just want to bang out a project. Oh, okay, cool. We're doing that now. And the next day I might have a lot of flexibility and we'll go out for the afternoon. It's been good.
That is an amazing work-life balance. Those who listen to my podcast know I talk about this a lot in relationship to my daughters. I have 4. We homeschool them. They're in the next room. So I'm making sure I mute in between in case it's too loud because they play and they have their fun with. But that life balance of being able to go out and hear them and talk to them and take my coffee for a little while in between calls and just be in front of them, help them out, do things with them. And as you're saying, that's a huge value. And I resonate with that greatly as a person, just because I think it's so much value being poured into your family, having them a part of that, see it, live it, and be able to extol the values directly to them, which I think sometimes the dichotomy between the entrepreneurial lifestyle I see people doing and preaching and acting and then sending their kids into the system and then not pouring into them, but pouring everything into their clients and business. I can't seem to reconcile that a lot of times. It doesn't make sense. I know there are differences for every person and some of you may have other challenges. That's okay. I understand. But for me, I just made a decision. My wife did a long time ago, just like we can't do that. Like if we're going to pour into this work and business together as a unit, which you're doing with your husband, which is incredible, then we have to do it together, which means we need to be unified on both fronts so that it will stay this way for the long term. And 17 years into it for us, how long have you guys been into this?
15
yeah.
Forever.
So it's become a normal part of life and flow to be in between calls or clients or dad's got to do this or that's cool. We'll go do this. And they have a flexibility and confidence in the way they're doing life, which is cool. And it sounds like you have that in your home environment too, which makes it probably pretty stress-free in some ways and not stressful in others and sort of stressful in different ways, right?
I would say yes. I think there's a lot of, in our conversations or, talking with people in the industry who maybe have a very different life from what I live. I mean, like, for example, I have a friend who's also a family member and they're like, oh my gosh, like I need the city. I need the bustle. That's what drives me and I love it. I'm like, that's great. I live on the edge of a national forest and a lot of property and like, don't touch me. I don't want to see neighbors. Right. Like
neighbors are too close.
Right. So I'm like, my language may drive somebody else nuts. And that's totally fine. And again, it's like build what you want. So, or, someone hearing like, oh my gosh, like you homeschool 6 kids. That's crazy. And you have all this stuff going on. And like, that seems like a lot. I'm like, yeah, but one, like you said, at this point, you're just kind of used to it. Like, and also again, with the support and my husband and I being on the same page of like how we choose to live or how we want to live. it's been fabulous. So I would say I would count my life very stress-free. I think someone getting into something different might be like, oh my God, because like it's hard to like figure it out. You kind of
Well,
like
of
build
course
the
it
ship
is.
as you
We
go.
all fumbled through it, and yet
Yeah.
our kids are still alive and for the most part flourishing. I didn't realize you lived on that much acreage in the corner. I live on 50 acres out in the middle of nowhere. You can't even see my neighbors. My
Oh, that's
actual
fabulous.
closest neighbor is my parents, who we built a road onto a hill and cut the hilltop, and they retired
Okay,
from
and
Oregon
that
out
is
to their house.
awesome. We live on 100 acres on the edge of a national forest, and my in-laws actually built on the property as well.
Super cool. So you got a
So
compound too. People are
we
like,
did.
"Oh, it's a spot." Well, it looks like a compound. No, not exactly.
It is
But
without
we could
being
turn it into a
told.
compound if we decided to, which is super cool because actually my in-laws bought the property up the hill, 7.5 acres on the one side. We bought the 3.5 on the other to insulate that area. And then we have about another 12.5 with a widower who his husband died about 3 years ago. And whenever she's ready to move, we've already made an offer on her home. And so we'll take over that
Oh,
acreage too.
that's awesome.
So we're just kind of spreading out a little bit. But how about 6 acres there in that space? But the dirt road's in too, right? You get going and you're having fun, and all of a sudden it's like the dirt road ends. I'm like, how many more dirt road? Like, where's the rest of 4x4s and guns and toys? Well, look, this has been fun. I didn't realize all that about you personally, which is so great because I like you more now than I did when we started the conversation because we resonate on so many levels about family and life, etc. I'm sure there's much more we could talk about. Is there something I didn't ask you or something you want to bring up that we didn't cover in the call?
No, I think we pretty much covered it all. I mean, Amazon ads to life and living. Yeah, I know that. I agree. Like same thing. Like I was like, oh my gosh, I knew we talked about like large family, and then like as you get into it, there's a lot of parallels, which is
There
super
is,
awesome.
and chickens. So I was always got to say that when it goes off because I'm not being disrespectful. I've got all my stuff silenced, but I can't silence Lance, the chicken, who likes to come hang out by my window whenever he hears me talking. But yeah, no, that's super cool. And I appreciate that. And guys, I would encourage you to go over and check out what they're doing on the advertising side and just see if there's something that resonates with you and family and life and business. We're obviously going to have more conversations going forward after this because there's a lot of things I'd love to talk to you about. And so I sure appreciate you coming on, saying a good word. Any final thoughts? Maybe something you want to drop at the last minute here on us?
Yeah, I would just say if I had to give a parting shot, if I had to summarize good ad management, I would say it's good ad spend allocation, really at the end of the day. So the one
Yeah.
thing that we found to be really beneficial is really just taking a look into where that ad spend is going. One way that we look at it is on a per product level and just making sure that those things are matching up, like you said, with the organic market share. That a lot of ways is determined on a per listing level. So you can sort of look at it through that lens, which has been very helpful for us. Everyone talks about like the 80-20, but nobody really knows how to do it. And we've been able to achieve some pretty cool things in large catalogs, even up to like 50,000 SKUs. And so kind of looking at things through that lens. So I'll just say, look at where your ad spend is going and make sure it makes sense.
Yeah, make sure it makes sense. And don't forget when your ad spend goes out the door, if you can keep it break even or profitable, preferably, know that you're going to get an organic benefit from that. Make sure you dial that in. That's your tacos, guys, especially if you're new to this and don't understand that, or if you're in the mid level of buying and you keep thinking, I can't buy more or because I don't have enough, you're missing the opportunity someone else is going to do. That's your competition. Trust me, we're doing it. So if you aren't doing it, meet your competition. And you have to be willing to spend in order to gain on this platform or frankly, anywhere in e-commerce. That's not what everybody wants to hear, but it's true, especially with the changes in advertising. So thanks for coming on and sharing all that with us. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. No, thanks for having me. This has been great.
Thank you. Well, guys, like, comment, share, engage, snide remarks. We don't care. It helps with the algorithm. Push it out anywhere. If someone needs to hear this show, please share it with them as we encourage everybody to do. Maybe we'll have Elizabeth back on. We'll always have another great guest to share life and family and build that know, like, and trust in the world of business and advertising. Guys, thank you so much for checking out the show. If you feel led, leave a comment. Again, leave a review if you think this was a great show. Catch you all later on the next episode.
Awesome. Thanks.